Take, take one. All right, this is Persuasive Speech 3. This is my audience. Okay, this is James Lloyd, and we're going to get started. An economist by the name of John Maynard Keynes once said, Capitalism is the astounding belief that the most wickedest of men will do the most wickedest of things for the greater good of all people. Now, I must ask you, do you really believe that? If no, you're probably running into the same problem that most Americans are. How do you explain capitalism to the guy who is defecating on police cars in front of Wells Fargo? Now, if you do believe that, stay tuned. I might want you to question yourself after this one. So, I'm a college student. I have stuff to pay, and basically, what I come to see is that capitalism is not as bad as people think, based on my economic classes and many books and documents I've read. But capitalism is corrupt, mainly because we are fallible, us being people. And that's not going to change under just any other economic system. So the best way to fix what we have now is to simply fix ourselves. Now, we all know that capitalism has its ups and downs. We've seen the stories of, the housing bubble collapse and the mortgage loan crisis. Basically, we have institutions and banks giving subprime loans to people who can't afford to pay them back. But is that really capitalism's fault? Let's look at Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Now, basically, in a journal review, an article called "Is Deregulation to Blame?" Kathleen Mangu-Ward talks about Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and points this out, that the reason that they were allowed to run crazy and to disregard common sense and ethics was simply because all their multi-trillion-dollar portfolios were guaranteed by taxpayer dollars. So, is that really capitalism's fault or crony capitalism? Basically, the federal government going into the free market system. I have a chart to show you guys. Basically, if you can zoom on this, you have basically these are the institutions who receive bailouts, and you have your J.P. Morgan Chase, your Wells Fargo. They all paid all their money back. Now let's go to the end. This is Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. They have not paid back 146,900,000,000 dollars. So, is it really capitalism's problem? I say to you, it's not. I say to you, socialism is the problem. Crony socialism is like what I like to call it. Basically, the federal government getting into the free market system. So our alternatives are what? More socialism? So we hear a lot of speech nowadays that the rich need to pay their fair share. We hear about how the 1% are controlling the 99, and how, hey, that guy has a Bentley. Let's go ask him to pay more in taxes. Well, excuse me, when did that become an idea? That guy paid in millions of dollars last year. You paid it. How much did you pay in? So, this is the argument for redistribution of wealth. And redistribution of wealth goes against human nature. As Craig Steiner points out in his own article on his own website, that in the article is titled on redistribution and spreading wealth. Steiner argues that socialism works against the human nature because it is counterproductive. The more you work and the more risk you take, the less it really pays out. Why? Because have to pay in a higher rate. So why would I work hard if I'm going to get less or be demonized? That's our progressive income tax. We basically, the progressive income tax is not a wealth killer, however, it's a wealth inhibitor. You're prevented from gaining wealth because when you get enter a new bracket, simply you have to pay more. Also, redistribution is immoral. C. Bradley Thompson writes in this article, Socialism versus Capitalism, which one is the moral system? Which is in the Journal Principle. He points out, under socialism, the ruling class of intellectuals, bureaucrats, and social planners decide what the people want and what is good for society, and then use the coercive power of the states to regulate tax and redistribute wealth to those who work for from those who work for a living. Sorry. In other words, socialism is a form of legalized theft. So, if socialism is theft and legal theft, then isn't that worse than capitalism? So, how do we fix it? I say to you that the best way to end the corruption is to fix ourselves. Now, you might ask, what do you mean? Well, simply, you can't demand virtue from somebody if you don't demand virtue from yourself first. So, with the crooked dealing that's going on in Washington and Wall Street, how are we going to hold them to a high standard if we don't hold ourselves to that high standard first? Change yourself to change your society, to change the world. Now, when I mentioned the crooked deals of Washington and Wall Street, we have to look at the federal government and its role nowadays of how they're demanding more from the rich. They're demanding more from the rich to pay for their crazy spending. Let's look at this. A new chart you can find it on Paul Ryan's budget sheet. And it's basically demonstrating the spending of the federal government in fiscal year 2010. Now, that's non-defense, and this is defense. This is under discretionary spending, which is basically they have to make a budget, they have to make sure they appropriate the amount that they need for that stuff, and they decide what to buy and what not to buy. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, interest, and other mandatory spending is on autopilot spending, which is you have to pay that. The federal government made itself pay that, and nobody can just change how much they want to pay that year. So we have a $3.5 trillion budget, and basically we want the rich to pay for that. So that can't keep on going like that. It's unsustainable. And Craig Steiner, he put out another article called The Proper Role of Government in the United States. He points out that the Constitution has not provided the federal government with the enumerated power to bail out financial systems or the oil industry, nor does it give the federal government power to borrow from future generations to reduce unemployment in this generation. This is the kind of stuff that the founders warned us about. Basically, we're trying to take from the rich from now and from our future generations to pay for this generation. You can't do that. That's immoral. Thomas Jefferson once wrote in a letter to John Adams, there is a natural aristocracy among men, the grounds of which are virtue and talent. Basically, the 1% don't have anything over you. rich people don't control everything. What it should be is the people who are doing right are the people who have the say. What do you mean? I mean, demand virtue from yourself so you can demand it from others, like I said before. Basically, you have to speak up. You have to make sure that your federal government is not colluding with the free market system to where you get messes like you did in 2008. You have to make sure that you don't support financial institutions and other capitalist things and other capitalists who do dirty deals and stuff like that. You can't do that. You have to demand virtue from yourself, and then you can apply it on everybody else. So what do we learn? We learn that capitalism is corrupt because we're corrupt, and it's not going to change just by changing economic systems. So the best way to fix capitalism, simply fix ourselves so we can change the world. Now, I must ask you again, do you agree with the statement that was said earlier by John Maynard Keynes? If you still do, God help you. I'm done. All right, feedback. Starting with the gentleman on the left.
I thought it was very good, very informative, and I've learned how to compare socialism and capitalism.
Okay. Next.
I thought it was very well executed. You have good illustrations that you used and um, pointing out our issue that we all need to check and search within first in order to heal the nation. We need to first get ourselves together.
Okay. Lady on right.
I thought that it was well spoken. I thought that there was a lot of good points in there in regards to. I like the fact that you used a lot of our founding fathers um, quotes in there, and just brought everything together and made it relevant for today. And I thought it was very good.
All right. This is James Lloyd checking out.